Hello, everyone. I see lots of black boxes with names that I do recognize. Thank you so much for taking out the time on a Thursday evening to join us. My name is Yiatin Chou, and I am co-president of Place NYC. I am joined here tonight by Maron, who is a co-founder and on our executive board. We're happy to bring together a distinguished panel of speakers that Maud will introduce very shortly. In the meantime, let me share a little bit about Place NYC. We were founded by a group of parent leaders in September of 2019. We are the fastest growing parent community in New York City. We engage daily with a vibrant community of 1,600 on social media, and our recent petition on keeping screen emissions in New York City garnered nearly 10,000 signers. Place NYC advocates for high quality, challenging education for every student in New York City public schools. We envision integrated classrooms of lifelong learners where all students from across the entire learning ability spectrum are fully supported. Accelerated curricula at all grade levels improve individual student outcomes, advance integration efforts, and strengthen school quality. We are glad that you can join us tonight to talk about ability grouping and how it supports acceleration, integration, and academic excellence. To kick off our presentation, I turn it over to Maud Maron.
Thank you, Yiatin, and welcome everyone. And a special welcome to our panelists. I will introduce our panelists and then we will go through a very brief slide deck before hearing from our panelists. Joseph Chou. And is Joseph here with us yet?
He is.
You are. Hello, Joseph. Joseph began teaching in 1988 in Francis Lewis High School in Queens, where he has served as the assistant principal of mathematics from 1996 until this year. He likes to say he built a math empire with his teachers' help. And here are some highlights. His teachers were able to help students achieve the highest AP Calculus, AB, and BC average scores in Queens, 4.55 to 4.75. out of 5. And over 70% of graduates meet the requirements for advanced Regents diplomas in mathematics, even though roughly 38% of incoming students scored 1s or 2s on their 8th grade New York math assessment. Roughly 50% of the 1,000+ graduates of Francis Lewis High School set for calculus or AP Calculus by the time they graduate. And the math team at Francis Lewis High School, which is a zoned school, consistently scores 2nd or 3rd in the New York State math competitions, usually behind Stuyvesant or Hunter or Bronx High School of Science. So we are very excited and happy to have Joseph here with us. Our next panelist, Maggie Feurtado, is a native New Yorker and a product of New York City public schools, specifically PS 61, Simon Baruch Junior High School, and Seward Park High School, and Fredonia State University. Maggie taught elementary school, junior high school math, honors math, and an at-risk program for students, as well as a gifted junior high school program in Ohio, before she returned to teach math in New York in 2003 at the New York City Lab Middle School, where 40% of students are from impoverished households and the student body is 72% students of color. She worked diligently to develop and offer the school's highly successful accelerated math program, and she was also the recipient of the 2014 Big Apple Award. We also have with us this evening Jonathan Plucker, who is the Julian C. Stanley Professor of Talent Development at Johns Hopkins University. He is also the president of the National Association for Gifted Children, and he frequently works with school districts on issues related to advanced education and equity. So, welcome all. And Yiatin, I don't know if you wanted to introduce Senator Stavisky.
Yes, we have all wonderful participants, but I do want to acknowledge that we have Senator Toby Stavisky here with us tonight. I just want to acknowledge her. She's been a big supporter, and I do want to be able to unmute her just so she can say hello. She's been a huge supporter of accelerated education, as well as the specialized high school test. We've had a number of events with Senator Stavisky, And I just want to acknowledge her. I know also Senator Comrie has registered to be a participant. I don't know if he's in the audience, if he is, or any member of his staff. I just want to acknowledge them and thank you very much.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you. Thank you. It's interesting, the topic, because there have been a lot of studies that show that the ability grouping not only works, but improves diversity. And when I was in school, believe it or not, it was called homogeneous groupings. And I just thank you all for coming, particularly the person you mentioned, Seward Park High School. My father taught there for about 40 years or so. Can you believe this? And I happen to be a graduate of science.
Yes, me too.
So is my son. And I taught at Brooklyn Tech, so I understand how important it is. I have a 6:30 Zoom, but I thank you all very much for putting this all together.
Thank you, Senator Stavisky. So Maud, I am going to start sharing the screen so we can start our formal presentation.
Sure.
Okay. I hope everyone can see what I have on the share screen. If you can give me a thumbs up, that would be okay. Wonderful.
Okay, great. So I'd like to just make a quick note about our title. It comes from a TED Talk by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie called The Danger of a Single Story, and we sent the link to folks. If you haven't had the chance to watch it, I highly recommend it. Basically, it's a frame for our discussion tonight. Yep. In New York City right now, let's go to the next slide, Yiatin. In New York City right now, we have major education decisions being made that will impact a generation of students. There are a lot of proposals to eliminate accelerated education, including phasing out gifted and talented, removing the SHSAT, which is the admissions test for specialized high school, and really eliminating all academic screens. And what we have, if we go to the next title, is a single story. We have a single narrative that we keep hearing that is told to us through headlines and through policy proposals. And the headlines that garner the most attention are that 50 years after Brown v. Board of Education, that New York State has the most segregated schools in the country. That language and analysis comes out of a UCLA report. And it is coupled with headlines, New York Times headlines that talk about how in 2019, only 7 Black students were accepted into Stuyvesant High School in a school system that is close to 70% Black and Hispanic students. And what we hear is that again and again, folks tell us that research shows that if we get rid of accelerated programs, that we can both create the integration that has been missing and that performance of all students will increase. And that, I will just say that I think both of those things are equally desired by all people right now, by teachers, by parents, to both have more integrated schools and to have improved academic performance. But the question we're going to explore tonight is whether or not that second part is true, whether or not all students will benefit academically by removing accelerated programs from New York City public schools. And how we're going to look at that, if we go to our next slide, is by looking at 3 separate things. What does the data tell us? What do families in New York City want, public school families, and what do our teachers know? So we're going to run through a few slides on what the data tells us, some information about what families are seeking in schools, and then we're going to turn it over to our panelists for some questions. So I'm going to turn it back to Yiatin for the data.
Okay, let's start with New York City schools. The most recent state tests show that significant disparities by ethnicities in both ELA and math proficiency. As you can see by the 2 charts, in ELA, 69% of Asian students are grade proficient, while just 35% of Black students are. For math, 74% of Asian students are grade proficient, while 28% of Black students are. While it may look like all are trending up, know that the DOE changed the test format just 2 years ago, so we don't really actually have much of a trend. But as you can see, the racial disparity is not new. Let's look at the access and opportunity. In New York City, families have to register for the GNT test. The number of kids who take the GNT test varies greatly by school districts. In District 3, the Upper West Side in Harlem, 61% of pre-kindergarten students take the GNT test. And in District 7, which is the South Bronx, just 6% of pre-K students take the GNT test. We see similar disparities for the SHSAT. 70% of Asian students in New York City take the SHSAT, and just 1 in 4 Black and Hispanic students take the SHSAT. Given the state of academic proficiency and the disparity in taking admissions tests for accelerated programs, grouping students by academic achievement results in racially disparate classrooms. So let's turn to the research. What does the research say? Duflo and Kremer, who won the 2019 Nobel Prize along with Banerjee for their research in global poverty, studied tracking in Kenya and published a study in 2011 that has been highly cited. They found that ability grouping benefit all students when teachers were incentivized to teach to the top of the distribution in each cohort. In the US, researchers came to similar conclusions in support of ability grouping. So the first study we'll talk about is one by Figlio and Page. They looked at data from a large-scale longitudinal study of US 8th to 12th graders and were able to compare tracked and untracked programs. They found that low ability students experienced larger test score gains if they were schooled in track settings. They found no evidence that detracking will improve outcomes among disadvantaged students. The next study is by Hawksby and Weingarth. They studied the effect of frequent school reassignments in Wake County due to a desegregation plan. The frequent reassignments changed the composition of the school cohorts and allowed the researchers to study the effects of various groupings. They show that students will have higher achievement when they're surrounded by peers with similar characteristics, proving out what many parents describe as the cohort effect. The study done by Cortez and Goodman looked at 9th grade students in Chicago public schools. Students with low 8th grade math tests were tracked into a double period algebra with specific instruction. The results show that for the lowest skilled student, the benefits of targeted pedagogy when tracked outweigh the impact of being exposed to lower skilled classmates. So furthermore, we have research that found that tracking helps high achieving minority students. Card and Giuliano studied a large urban school district where schools were required to create a separate high achiever classroom if at least 1 4th grader tested as gifted. To fill those classrooms, they took the top performing students in the schools. Because the district schools are segregated by race and socioeconomic status, this gave access to accelerated programs to many minority students. By ability grouping, they significantly boosted the performance of higher achieving minority students, even in the poorest districts. The effect was particularly notable for Black and Hispanic students with persistent gains throughout the 6th grade. Finally, Thomas Lovelace analyzed national data and found that higher percentages of Black and Hispanic students scored well on the AP test in states where there was more tracking programs. So another way to look at this is, what is the downside of detracking? Well, detracking penalizes high achieving students. Argis and al. Observed that moving high achieving students from a class composed of above average students to a heterogeneous class leads to an 8.4% decrease in scores. Thomas Lovelace found that detracking did diminish the gap between high and low achievers, but it was accomplished by depressing the achievers at the very top of the spectrum. Detracking removes access for minority students. San Francisco removed algebra in the 8th grade and delayed it to be given in the 9th grade. This was actually Richard Carenza legacy. He was the superintendent in San Francisco at the time this policy was changed. So they claimed that it was a success as fewer students failed the 9th grade algebra. But what we have now is we have a cohort of students that actually graduated out of high school under this policy. And through FOIL data that was available last year, we saw that the first cohort of students had to double up in math. So basically take more than one math course per year to be able to access calculus by the 12th grade. Now, this increases the workload in a much more compressed time frame. They also saw an absolute decrease in the number of students taking calculus. And further, there was a drop in the number of minority students taking calculus or even high-level math. So I want to close out the research by bringing it back to New York City. In New York City, the decrease in gifted and talented and track programs in minority neighborhoods is linked to a decrease in test scores and specialized high school admissions for Black and Hispanic students. Brooklyn Tech, the largest of the specialized high school in New York City, was 50% Black and Hispanic students when there were SP programs or track academic programs throughout the borough. Many of those programs were discontinued based on the same equity arguments we see being advanced now. The number of Black and Hispanic kids accepted subsequently plummeted at specialized high schools. This has led Bronx Borough President Ruben Diaz and Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams in a published report in 2017 to conclude that establishing more middle schools with gifted and talented programs and accelerated learning can help improve performance on the SHSAT, as well as performance in high school and beyond. Currently, of the 32 school districts in New York City, 10 school districts have none or just one G&T program. That's 1/3 of the school districts in New York City. And they are the school districts that have 90% Black and Hispanic students. So that concludes what the research says. And before I turn this over to Maud Maron, I want to acknowledge and thank Dr. Amelie Marion, who contributed to reviewing and distilling the research for this research part of the presentation. Thank you, Amelie. Now I turn it over to Maud.
Thank you very much. So what we're going to do now is, and this is a one slide, very brief before we get to our panelists, is talk about what New York City families have. You know, they say you vote with your feet. It's like what the school, what the kinds of schools that parents are looking for, we know by the numbers. So we have 32,000 students taking a gifted and talented test in New York City every year, 15,000 kids testing for kindergarten seats, even though in New York City, only 1 in 5 eligible students will get a seat at one of the 5 citywide gifted and talented schools. So there is real scarcity to match between the students who are eligible, ready, and capable of doing well in some of these programs and the programs that are being offered. Similarly, with the SHSAT, we have 28,000 students trying to access the kind of education offered at specialized high schools, and we have just 5,000 seats in 8 schools. And in Queens, a borough that has a tremendous number of high achieving students, we have just 125 seats in a specialized high school. If you look at the applications to our screened admission schools, you can see what parents are looking for, because we have acceptance rates from 2.2% to 5.3% at some of the most sought after academically rigorous screened schools in New York City. And the information that Place NYC has been able to gather is the number of parents who are asking via petition to save academic screen schools that are, while this discussion to eliminate them is occurring. And also, you know, in the spring, once we entered this COVID period where we were no longer able to do state tests, and where we, the DOE made a decision to not have, to include the grades for last year on report cards, and to move for middle school students, we moved to a non-grade system. They decided to do a listening tour, the Department of Education, and to ask parents what they wanted. And I'll just only one small editorializing. I thought they were surprised by what they heard, because over 70% of parents said we want to hold on to screen schools, because that is where so many parents have traditionally sought to get their children into. So these numbers tell us, oh, and there's one additional number that I'll mention, which is that the charter schools in New York City generally have a wait list of over 50,000 kids, of close to 50,000 kids. In that, I think a lot of parents, especially we find with the charter school applications, we have a lot of low-income parents and a lot of minority parents seeking what is often understood to be a more rigorous and academic program. You know, and that is something that we know that families want. And now it is our great privilege and pleasure to turn to hearing what teachers know. And so we are going to turn to Joseph and Maggie and Jonathan to discuss what gets learned, what we know from inside the classroom. So I am going to start with our two local teachers first, Joseph and Maggie, and ask you both, throughout your careers, you have both successfully advocated for and taught in accelerated math classes. Why have you advocated for ability grouping in your math program? And let's be alphabetical about it. Joseph, we'll start with you.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting me to join. I thought it was going to be ladies first. Anyway, this is very complicated. It's I'm glad to see the data you showed. Nobody ever came to our school to do any kind of research, because their research result would probably tell them all wrong. So it depends on the goal of the system. Let's say you look at a particular school. If your goal is to hand everybody a diploma, you don't want screen. You don't want homogeneous grouping. You want heterogeneous grouping, because the better student in the class can help the weaker one. However, like you said, if you do that, then the top learners don't get to learn. If your goal is to prepare every student for life, for college, then you need to have on the high school level, well, I hate to call it tracking, but basically I program every kid in my building. I program about 4,000 some kids every year. I gave a placement exam to the incoming 8th graders. Don't care what they get on the regions is relevant unless you got a 90 or higher, because the region score is a converted score. So depending on what they score, I may put them in 2-year algebra, 1-year algebra, or I skip some kids in algebra altogether, put them in geometry honors, because many students, our school was about 60% Asian. Many of the kids already took like a Saturday program, like a prep program. They go to ABC, they go to, let's say, Mega, they go to America, so they already know most of the algebra. There's really no need for them to sit in the algebra course again. Those are the kids who ultimately get into AB Calc or BC Calc. So I have basically like regular 1-year algebra and 2-year algebra. We don't do the double period because it doesn't make any sense. I weigh about 150 pounds. If you ask me to bench press 150 pounds, I may have trouble right now. But with practice, I should be able to do it. However, if you ask me to do 300 pounds, never in my life would I be able to do it. You can give me as much time as you want, it won't work. I also look at their 8th grade assessment scores. According to New York State, if they scored a 1 or a 2, they will have trouble passing the algebra regions. Algebra passing percentage is around 91% each year. So very few kids fail the algebra regions. Now, to score a 1 on the test, you have to walk in and you have to sign your name, then you got a 1, because that's another exam you get a 0 on. So at any rate, tracking, I was able to use homogeneous grouping to help me create the program we had. I had a new principal about 12 years ago. That's when we really took off, because he told me you can program the whole school. Before that, the guidance counselor did it. They had no clue how to program kids. In math, it's very clear cut. Either you know it or you don't. And you can't wing it. You can't put a kid who's a 1 into an advanced class hoping miracle will happen. You have to program kids by ability. So in my geometry class, I have a slower track geometry, which basically were kids who got 70s or lower, even 75 or lower on the algebra regions. We have team teaching classes, which are similar, slightly ahead of the slower track, but with 2 teachers in the classroom, many kids do well. Many students do well because they can ask a question anytime they want to the other teacher who's not teaching. I have a regular track, which are kids from basically 80 to 85. I have the honor class, I have kids 88 to 100. If they do extremely well in the algebra, let's say they take the 1 year algebra, they end up getting 98, 97. I let them take algebra 2 and trig during their honors, during their sophomore year. And during the junior year, they double up geometry and pre-calc. So they can be ready for AB Calc or AB or BC. I do the same thing with trig. I have a slower track, I have team teaching, I have a regular track and honor track. In pre-calc, I have regular honors. And I made it a rule that if you pass the algebra, you have 2 or more years, you take geometry. Then if you pass geometry, well, you can't pass the course unless you pass the regions, because the region standard is very low. And if you pass geometry, you must take algebra 2 trig. I don't care if you have 1 or more year, you have to take it, I don't care. I've told parents to call, don't even bother calling the superintendent, call 311 and ask for the mayor because he's in charge. My principal told me not to do that anymore, so that's fine. We have, it's because we have, I remember Hispanic kids who had a 95 average. He refused to take AP Stat. I told him you have to take one, Calc or Stat, choose one. He goes, I don't want to take neither because they're all Asian. I said, I don't care. I said, your scores are far higher than those Asians. So I put him in. I told him you can have your parent call the mayor. He goes, I'm not doing that. I'm going to have my parents call the principal. So the principal called me down and said, you have to do something with this kid. So I called him down and said, look, he said, you cannot put me into the class a week after the term began. I said, yes, I can because you score. He said, a week later, you're going to take a test. I told him, if you don't score a 95 or higher, I will consider taking you out. But if you intentionally score up, I'm going to make you suffer and keep you in the class. Long story short, a week later, he came see me with his score. He got 100. Of course, he got a 5 on the AP exam. The trouble with this also has to do with the mentality. This year, we had 4 Hispanic kids in my BC Calc class. There's 34 kids in it, 4 Hispanic kids. All 4 of them got 5s on the AP exam. One of them went to MIT. The valedictorian, salutatorian didn't get in, he got in, right? He deserved it. He deserved it. I tell my teachers the math you teach is not that important, but everything else you do is. They learn life lessons. We had a kid, one of the 4 kids, was late to his English AP class first period. And the only way he could take pre-calc honors was that first period pre-calc honors because there's no seat anywhere else. He promised me that he would get up early to go. So the first day I went to check on him, he saw me. He said, I got up half an hour earlier just to make sure I was on time. That lesson will help him for the rest of his life. The pre-calc and BC Calc probably won't. So anyway, tracking is very, very important if you want to build a program. However, if you want to hand everybody who's breathing a diploma, you want heterogeneous grouping because the teacher cannot possibly help all the kids. And if you pair them up, you pair the 90 kids up with the 60 or 50 kids, they help each other. The 90 kids actually do better because they can now understand better because they have to explain. And that will help the lower end kids do well enough to pass. However, that will prevent the kids from learning more. So my 23 years of, the teaching experience, I always taught, I always asked for the lowest level kids. So when I became assistant principal, I still taught the lowest level kids because I have more enjoyment teaching them. Because when you see everybody pass the regions, 2004, 2005, 2 years in a row, I taught double period classes with seniors who had 1 to 2 math credits, or maybe 3 the most. I was able to get every single one of them to graduate. That gave me tremendous sense of accomplishment because they needed it. All right, so tracking is very important because otherwise those poor kids will be in the other classes getting totally lost. Mm-hmm. Some kids said to me, I taught them how to transpose. I don't know if you'll know the math term. Anyway, this girl threw her pencil up in the air and said, how come my teacher didn't teach me this way? One of the freshmen, I would have gotten it. And the pencil landed on her head. Her first name is Yasmin. I don't remember her last name. This is like 14, 15 years ago. They all pass the region, they all graduate. So tracking is very, very important.
Joseph,
you.
I'm very fascinated by your answer about the taking on some of the kids on the lowest level. So I've made a note and I'm going to come back to it as a follow-up. But first, I'd like to go to Maggie, and Maggie, ask you about why you advocated for ability grouping in your math program in your middle school.
I've been teaching, I've been through 3 different school systems. And since I've started teaching, I recognized that there was such a wide gap between the lowest student and the highest student that when I first started teaching, and that was back in 1970, believe it or not, I started when I was 3. I was a young teacher. I grouped the kids in my class because I knew, I was teaching 4th grade at the time, and I knew that some children could not move along as fast and understand as quickly. Everybody was capable of understanding, but not as quickly as others. So the kids who could understand were in one group and they moved ahead. And the kids who had a harder time, we moved ahead more slowly. But it was very effective, and everybody felt a sense of accomplishment because they were learning something. I was fascinated by the fact that you showed the statistics about how the top level gets depressed, the scores get depressed, because I feel that in the accelerated classes, the state tests do not show, there is no ceiling for them. If they get one question wrong through a careless error or some kind of silly mistake, they're penalized heavily for that. The test should be made more difficult so that the ceiling is so much higher so that they can show the growth. Part of the problem in terms of having opposition to ability grouping, nobody wants to take the top kids out because they say, well, we're going to be graded on growth. And those kids are going to keep us going, whereas the struggling students may not make the growth. Well, these kids can't make the growth either because they're starting out with 4s and nearly perfect scores, and it's very difficult for them to show any growth. It's next to impossible. I was able to, first of all, in the school where I was, in Lab Middle School, we started a program where in 6th grade, everybody stayed, they were heterogeneously grouped. And then they took a test at the end of 6th grade, which was made up by me and several other teachers. It was not the standardized test. It was questions that were relative to what we expected them to be able to do and whether or not they would struggle or persevere to try something more difficult, because that's definitely a part of this. And then we selected the kids. They were put in, we started out with 1 accelerated class, and then we had 5 regular classes. We ended up, maybe, I'm going to say 7 or 8 years, maybe 10 years later, we opened it up to 2 classes because we felt we were missing probably about 15 kids. And we thought, well, we're going to fill the rest of the spots in with kids who are very close to it, and we're going to bring them up, which I think we successfully did. And then so 7th grade is 2 different groups, the accelerated and then the 5 or 4 in this case, regular math classes. Then in 8th grade, they have an accelerated algebra, 2 classes of that. They have 2 regular algebra classes, and then 2 general math 8th grade classes. And the accelerated algebra goes into, they do some geometry, they do logarithms, stuff out of the Algebra 2 class, and they move along more quickly. We also have had an opportunity to be able to give the AMC 8 contest, which is a national contest. We've given the Continental Math League. We give the New York State Math League test every year, and they relish this. They go after it. They find it challenging. These are the kids who want to learn, want to do, and they have an opportunity to do so. They're provided with these opportunities. We could not possibly give the AMC 8 test to all of our students because it's prohibitively expensive. We don't have the funds, but we can manage to do it for 4 classes. Actually, our parents club foots the bill for the 4 classes, and the kids get a kick out of it. And the top 10 then take the AMC 10. That's before they even go to high school. So they have an idea, and it's kind of like a mentality. And I taught with a woman last year. We taught the class together, and she had never taught this before. And I said, just watch what happens. At the beginning of the year, they're this like amoeba-like group. They're all like, they don't know what they're doing. And by the end of October, the beginning of November, they've coalesced into this group of, yeah, we want to do it. And it's just the enthusiasm and the level of work and the expectations for themselves and for each other are fabulous. It's just a fabulous thing. I can't say enough about it. I mean, these kids have come back and told me. I had a student go to Harvard from Stuyvesant, and another one went to NYU, majored in engineering. The Harvard student was majoring in math. There are so many students that come back, and there's another. In fact, one of the minority kids that was accepted from our program went to Stuyvesant. There were two that year, actually. Neil deGrasse Tyson's son and another boy. And the one, Neil deGrasse Tyson's son, went to NYU, and the other boy went to Harvard. I mean, the opportunities that this has afforded to them has just been wonderful. And math is developmental. It's just like if we all went and we all started in, let's say, I don't know, German 4 tomorrow. We can't do it. We don't know German, so it would be impossible. And to have somebody sit next to me for 5 minutes to help me is not going to work. That doesn't work. They need to be taught at their level. And if it's a lower level, a more slower paced level, that's okay. And when I say lower level, I don't mean it in terms of mundane, boring rote tasks either. I just mean they progress more slowly, or maybe they need more scaffolding. Whereas the accelerated student can go with less scaffolding and can move faster. So it doesn't have to be boring, rote, and mundane. The other thing I wanted to say was when they talk about they want to make changes to include more minority students in the accelerated programs, I don't think it should be at the expense of the program. I think it means that we have to double up our efforts in the lower grades to get those children to where they get a better education and can compete. I think that's the source of the problem.
Thank you, Maggie. And that leads me right to our question for Dr. Plucker, which is, Dr. Plucker, you've advocated for gifted education programs, which is, of course, a form of ability grouping for many years. What do you see as valuable for students that are in the gifted class? And then touching on something that both Joseph and Maggie have mentioned, do you think that there is a downside for the classrooms that would otherwise have those gifted students in them?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me here today. I want to start out by saying that everything Joseph and Maggie said and everything that you showed in that PowerPoint is just spot on. It's exactly what the research says. And the part that just really astounds me about all the controversies that you're dealing with in New York City, and it's not just New York City, right? Lots of school districts around the country are wrestling with these issues, is we've got really good research and really good practice now for decades. Like it's not like we don't know anything. We actually do have lots of potential solutions, lots of interventions. Maggie talked about some, Joseph talked about some. Like it's not that this stuff is secret. So whenever I see a San Francisco say, you know what, the only way we can solve equity is to get rid of all advanced programs, I always think, wait, well, no, what are you doing? We have so many other strategies that we know work. And then we know what will happen if you get rid of those programs. You're going to make these differences even bigger. You're going to remove opportunity for lots of students. So and we'll get more into that as we go through here. In the chat box, I'm gonna post a blog post that I wrote over the spring. It was published this summer that sort of summarizes where I think the research is on various sort of what I would call advanced education strategies. We have a version that we're going to publish as a longer article that'll be out in December, January, and I'll make sure that I send that so that it can be circulated whenever it comes out. I really think that Joseph's point at the beginning, and then you said this too, Maggie, in a different way. Whenever anyone asks me to summarize the research on ability grouping, My shorthand, and this isn't very nuanced, but if you divide students into 4 different groups based on performance, ability grouping seems to help students in the lowest quartile and the highest quartile the most. Now that assumes high quality curriculum, high quality, passionate teachers, etc. Right? Students in the middle, it seems to benefit a little bit, but it's those 2 groups on the ends where it really seems to help students grow the most. In some studies, it's the lowest 25% who grow the fastest. So this whole mythology that grouping really hurts the lower performing students, et cetera. There's just so little evidence of that. And most of that evidence is case studies, and I do case study research. It's very, very valuable, but you can cherry pick case studies and say, oh, look how horrible this situation was. But I can do that for science education. I can do that for schools in general. I can do that for housing policy. I can do that for the space program. Like you can't cherry pick excellence and like tragedy, which is what that work usually does. So there's a lot of success stories out there, and people just tend to gloss over them when returning to that to the opening theme. When you're only listening to one story, right? What is it that one of my mentors said to me? It's a mighty thin piece of paper that only has one side. And whenever I hear people say, oh, this never works for kids, I always think, wait, hold on a second. That's very absolute. Let's be a lot more careful about that. And the second part of your question to me was, it's essentially the flip side of an argument I've heard for decades now about, if you're in a heterogeneous classroom, the students get to interact with students at different performance levels, and there's a benefit to it. There's very little research that there's a learning benefit for most students in that setup, and we're going to talk about why later. So I won't get into that now. But you're a 24-year-old teacher. All you've ever wanted to do is teach. You're super pumped up to get in there. You walk into a huge class size, and they give you the student data, and you go, wait, I have to teach 10, 11 grade levels of reading ability and 8 or 9 in math? I don't know how to do that. I literally was not trained to do this job. They are in a horrible, horrible position. And I think that's one of the real sad pieces of this is we're not doing teachers any favors. You know what? And most teachers aren't as experienced and skilled as Maggie and Joseph, and that's what causes the problem. If every teacher was Maggie and Joseph, I would not be worried about this problem that much. But they are not. They are like master teachers who have lots of experience with this. Most of our teachers are younger teachers, and they don't have that skill set. That's where the problem becomes a major issue.
So that, am I unmuted? Yes, I'm unmuted. So, well, that is a very helpful and interesting answer, and I think it was responsive, actually. So I want to move on to something that is at the crux of these conversations in New York City and actually throughout the nation, which is to talk about integration. Because one of the reasons why we wanted to talk about ability grouping today is because really, when you unravel the integration conversation, we're talking about how we can get kids, how we can create integrated classrooms that are successful. And when you unravel some of the problems, it comes down to, based on the data that that Yiatin was sharing earlier, in terms of where our students are performing when we break out students into the different racial categories. So my question quite simply is, do you think, and this is, I'm going to open this to anyone who wants to answer it, that ability grouping and the goal of integrated classrooms are mutually exclusive? You know, why or why not is really the question there. And anyone who wants to take a stab at that. Uh-oh, I'm not a teacher, but I'm going to call on someone if you guys don't. If no one wants to start first, Maggie, you'll go.
Yeah. Oh, I was having trouble unmuting. I'm
Okay,
sorry.
great.
Um, I don't think they are mutually exclusive. I think that there have to be certain structural changes that have to take place. And I think number one would be the GT test should be automatically given to every student in the system. I think that should be a given. I can't imagine that the percentages, I had no idea that they were that low, to be honest, but I can't imagine that every child should not have an opportunity to take that, and every child should be given during a school time then. I mean, it doesn't have to be for, eliminate the kindergarten thing and do it in kindergarten, then start them in first grade. It does not have to, first of all, it doesn't necessarily prove out that children in kindergarten that test to be gifted, a lot of times it's from the home environment and they aren't actually gifted anyway. It's actually third or fourth grade, and Dr. Plucker, you can correct me on that if I'm wrong, but that's where it actually would make a difference. But every single child should be tested. The other thing would be for the SHSAT, they're trying to offer a lot more in terms of test prep for that, but why not just, again, offer the test during the day? Offer everybody takes the test. That's it. It's just a given. And that would do a lot toward offering an opportunity to children who may be qualified and never even get a chance to, complete the paper. I think that's very important. In terms of integration and ability grouping, though, I don't think that there is and I think Dr. Plucker referred to that before. It's not like you're going to siphon off children and put them in an accelerated math class and they're never going to see anybody else for the rest of their school day. They have lunch, they have gym, they have English, they have art, they have all different classes. In fact, in our school, they actually gave the 8th graders individual schedules. They don't travel as a class. They travel individually, and they have, it's not exactly individual, it's more like cohorts, but they're smaller cohorts and they get mixed in. And they made sure that, like in homeroom, it's completely randomized. So students are mixed together, because sociological, in terms of social interaction, that is important. I don't think it takes precedence over the content, but it is important to have that. And I think that's another way. If you group children differently throughout the day, that's another way to have the children interact with one another so they're not permanently siphoned off, so to speak. But there's one other thing I wanted to mention, Maud. I hope you don't mind if I say this now, because I forgot to mention it before. One of the problems that I really did see before, and this to me is harmful to the academically able math students. Math students should be involved in productive struggle. They should have to think about things. And I'm talking about 2 + 2 = 4 is mundane, it's trivial, and it becomes boring and tedious. And I don't like the idea of the more able students to be bored by math and actually develop a negative attitude toward the class because they really don't understand what math is. They've never really been challenged by the work in the classroom. They've never really been forced to think or take their time or spend some time on the work. It's automatic. Oh, I got this. And then the teacher says it 6 more times and the kid is literally tearing his hair out saying, I can't stand this class. And so I think in that respect, we're doing a lot of harm to the children. Did I answer adequately? I'm not sure.
That's a great answer, and that's very interesting. Dr. Plucker, I saw you nodding your head about, I thought productive struggle was a great phrase.
Yeah, and especially, Maggie raised several points that I think are spot on. But I think especially we've got pretty good research now that especially for young women who are talented in math,
yes,
if they start to think math is boring, you start to lose them. You start to show them that it's actually incredibly useful, fun, exciting. Those programs that are teaching math in a challenging, interesting way, like I would say real math, they don't have any problem getting young women into advanced math classes. So it's one of those things where if you start teaching math in stereotypical ways, I guess stereotypically negative ways, you shouldn't be surprised when students their attitudes start to fit the stereotypes, right? So I remember when I was a shiny new chemistry teacher many, many moons ago now in high school, and I had a student who would nail the conceptual part of every chemistry exam, and she wouldn't even write anything for the applied math parts. And after the second exam, I pulled her aside and I said, "What's going on? Like, you know this. You know this better than anyone in the class." And she goes, "Oh, no, I'm just really bad at math." And I was like, "Well, how do you know?" And she said, "Oh, I had this teacher 3 years ago who told me that it just wasn't my thing. And so, I've pretty much avoided it since." This is a high school junior who is clearly incredibly, incredibly bright, and literally found ways to avoid math because someone said, "Yeah, math's boring. You're not very good at it anyway. Don't worry about it." And so she didn't. We've got to be so careful about that. And I think the solution is just what Maggie said. Make it challenging and interesting. And you're going to be surprised at those kids. Joseph gave examples of this when he first talked tonight. Kids who don't think that they can do it suddenly realize what real math is. And then all of a sudden they love it. And everyone's like, "Oh, it's a miracle." It's like, no, like we actually just taught him real challenging math. Surprisingly enough, it works.
So I'm gonna, sticking with this subject a little bit, I wanted to say, Maggie and Joseph, I know you both just retired, but thinking of our present moment in New York City, where we have a lot of students missing months on end of school because of COVID-19. I want to ask you, we've heard a lot about the research showing us that ability grouping is coupled with targeted pedagogy, that we're really focusing on what the kids in that group is challenging for them. We see that can significantly improve learning outcomes. Do you think that we could employ that kind of ability grouping and targeted pedagogy now in New York City to help, or throughout the country, to help students who are going to be coming back to school with really significant learning losses because of COVID-19? Are these strategies that we might be able to use to help children who have missed so much schoolwork? Joseph, you want to jump in? I know you're just recently retired, so you don't have to think about going back into the classroom, but if you were going back into the classroom.
Well, my school already destroyed what I did. They killed the 2-year algebra. They made everybody go into 1 year. My principal going to make every kid take the regions. For those who pass the region, they'll go into pass the regions high, they'll go into the regular geometry. If they pass the regions low, they'll go into a 2-year geometry. And for those who fail, they're going to take a course called geometry, but they learn algebra anyway. I call that organized cheating. Of course, we can apply the strategies. The problem is you have to have the teacher. Now, going back to Dr. Plucker, no teachers in my department would want to leave. Nobody. I have a teacher who was like 36 years. She won't retire. She should have retired a long time ago. Nobody wants to leave because their job is very doable. They know who's sitting in front of them. They know what my expectations are. My expectation is very simple. Your passing percentage on the regions has to be higher than the department average. Doesn't have to be 100%. But I have teachers with 100% passing, teachers with 98% passing, teachers with 99% passing. Because not doing work is not an option on the part of the students in the math department of Francis Louis High School. We have cabinet meetings weekly. The other APs complain that kids always do math homework in the classrooms. Because I'm looking forward to the day when my teachers are complaining that kids are doing your homework in the math classroom. But anyway, these strategies can apply, but it has to have the commitment of the administration. You can ask any of my teachers. My question to them is always, why are you passing this kid? It's never, why are you failing this kid? Why are you passing? Because I have a teacher who made more than 1,500 phone calls throughout the year. That's on average, 3-4 phone calls a day to parents, right? So if the system is holding the wrong people accountable, they're holding teachers accountable. You got to hold the kids accountable. Kids fail because they don't do any work, not because teachers don't teach. If you look at the kids who are failing, their attendance is far worse than that of the teachers. And in mathematics, you need to be there because if you fall behind when the teacher starts a new unit, you're lost for the rest of the unit until the teacher starts a new unit. And hopefully that new unit doesn't build upon the unit you missed. And people have to understand that. I mean, I didn't get to participate in the segregation part. New York City schools are not segregated. New York City neighborhoods are segregated. Therefore, kids go to zone schools. That's why the schools seem to be segregated, right? I used to live in Bayside. My next door neighbor was the math AP of Cardozo. He retired in 96 or 97, I believe. He said when he took over the math department of Cardozo, his goal was to beat Martin Van Buren. And look at Martin Van Buren now, right? Because the neighborhood changed, right? So to fix that problem, they got to do K through 8. Too many kids will take the GNT test, score 90 percentile, but didn't get a seat. That's what they have to fix. They got to fix that first. Not to have a gifted program in every school. That's wrong. That's the politician's answer. But for every kid who made the minimum cut, they have to have a seat. Not necessarily in their neighborhood, but they have to have a seat. That's how you fix the problem. We have plenty Black Hispanic kids in our school that do well. There's one kid, I believe she's Jamaican. I'm sorry to sidetrack again. She ended up going to Barnard. Her mother came in and thanked me. I said, why are you thanking me? She did all the work. She goes, you have no idea what impact you have on this kid. They go to church every Sunday. The kid would argue with the priest. The mother said, I would put her clothes and say, sit down, put her clothes, say, sit down. She wouldn't, right? She ended up getting a full scholarship. Her mother told me that scholarship is more than what she makes a year. Every time she has a birthday, they're just ordinary people. They would ask her what she wanted. She wanted books. She didn't do that well in math because she didn't get into AB Calc, AB or BC. She took regular calculus, and she won't let me help her. She would not. She said, I have to learn to do it myself. Right? Well, these are the things you need. You don't need a African-American teacher for the African-American kids or Hispanic teacher for the Hispanic children. You need an individual who cares, who knows what they're doing, the best teacher, a great teacher to help the kid. Right? I don't think the system's ready to do that. They, like my teachers talk to their classmates because they still meet. All they get is, why are you failing this kid? They go, that's interesting because my boss asked me, why are you passing this kid? Because life lessons have to be learned in high school. If a kid fails a high school class, it's not that bad. But when they lose their first job, it's deadly. Right? I had a kid visiting me sometime in January this year. I remember his name, Zishan. I said, Zishan, why are you visiting me? I failed you. He goes, yes, because you failed me. I woke up. He's now in charge of the computer operation in this region for his company. So you don't like I said, you don't need I don't read too much research because they're all misleading. I always tell my principal, they should come here, do a research here that will overthrow everything they've done so far, because what they do make no sense. Math is ability based. It's not how tall you are, what color you are. They said, look at your calculus class, they're mostly Asian. I would say, look at your basketball, they're mostly African American. They go, they're not the same. Because they're ability based. Would you like to put some Asian kids on lose? Our basketball team was champion for boys team was champion for Division B. Our girls team was the number 1, number 2 in the city, right? It's ability based, right? If you have the passion, you're compassionate, you do the right thing by the children, they will all rise above. Every kid has the potential, but they learn at different speed. You have to recognize that. You also have kids I had a kid who was late every day. I went to her guidance counselor. I got yelled at by that little Jewish woman. She said to me, do you know she doesn't have breakfast? Her father took up on them. It's the mother and her. She doesn't even know where to get food. So I told her that every day. I said, why are you late? Because I was trying to get breakfast. I said, do me a favor. Go to the school cafeteria, get breakfast. Tell them I'm your teacher. Tell them I said to bring it up. They said they wouldn't. I said, you go to Mr. Rasky. Mr. Rasky will let you. So she ate breakfast in my room for once. Then she was never late ever again. She will get up early, go to the cafeteria, eat breakfast, and come to the class. But she's African American, I'm Asian. Most of that class was Black Hispanic kids. They never dealt with Asian adult. They didn't know what to do with me. So they basically did whatever I asked them to do. And they would argue with others how my way is better than the other way. But anyways, you have, as a teacher, have to have a passion, and that passion shows. And if you care, they know. They will do what you have them to do. The 2005, I called every kid I called every kid at home. So when I got to the last kid, Dennis, his mother picked up. He says, "What's this?" I said, "Mr. Chou, I just want to let you know your son passed the region with 69. If you pass everything else, he will graduate on time." She burst into tears. She said, "I want to let you know this morning before I went to work, I went to my son's room to make sure he got up for the Regents exam. I opened the door, he was studying for math. He's 17 years old. I've never seen him study math until this year. I want to thank you." I said, "Don't thank me. He did the work. I didn't do any work. I just encouraged him." But these are the kind of teachers we need. And I have many of them. I said about 6 years ago, or maybe 8 years ago, I said, when I become one of the most effective teachers in terms of region passing percentage, I would retire. I stopped saying that after 2 years. I was getting 94% passing, 96% passing. I hired a new teacher, 100% passing. I said, that's it, I'm not saying that because I have to retire sooner than I'm fine. But these are the kind of teachers. I mean, Dr. Plucker mentioned teachers don't stay. My teachers won't leave. I told them if I leave, the school's go down the drain. If you need a recommendation, I'll be more than happy to write you one. They go, we're not leaving just yet. They don't want to leave. It's a very cohesive group. The state does ranking for the algebra, geometry, trig. Algebra, English, American history, global, and living environment. For each school, the math department ranking was 4.99. So I thought we did well. It's probably out of 5. Then I checked Stuyvesant 4.99. I checked Townsend Harris 4.99 or 4.99. So I called them the 4.99 family. The other department were in the 3s. Same student. My principal used to say, because you have better students. I said, yeah, we only have better students in the math department. They don't do as well, right? So like I said, the segregation issue, the equity flag, well, they're just using equity to play the race game. They don't want to admit that they have issues in the lower grades because they socially promote students. They can't. I understand you don't want a 15-year-old in the middle school or 12-year-old in elementary school, but you have to do a better job down there to make real change. Now we're lucky; we get a lot of kids from Asia, including the Asian part of Russia. A lot of Baharians. Their school system is about 2 years ahead in math than ours. So mostly when I have kids from Asian countries, I put them in geometry if they're a little slow. Most of them go into trig, right? Many of them don't speak English, so I put them in algebra, then move into trig. I skip them in geometry because they already learned geometry in 7th grade in China, in Korea, in Japan. That's how we have success. You gotta program students by their ability, not by grade level. And you can't lump everybody together hoping miracles will happen. That's what you do if you want to, if you want to have higher rate of graduation with like really bad quality students. So anyway, hope I haven't said too much. You haven't told me to stop, so I'm good.
No, but Joseph, what you're speaking to is the passion of teachers, and I think it's very interesting knowing how, on average, what a short amount of years we have teachers. And I read somewhere, I don't know if it's accurate, I didn't check that, but that on average we have that teachers have 3 years under their belt in the New York City public school system, because we have so many teachers who start teaching, realize it's not for them and leave. And so the teachers who wound up staying for a really long time, kids are very lucky when they get a teacher who's extremely experienced and who has the kind of passion you're talking about among your math teachers. I wanted to throw this out there to the 3 of you based on what I've heard from you saying. And it comes down to the issue of ability grouping versus tracking. And I think some of the tension that we're hearing in New York City, for instance, around middle schools, we have screened middle schools. And what we wind up doing in some districts, all our districts are a little bit different, but what we wind up doing, I think, with some of our screening is creating tracked programs, because we're tracking by school, because kids have to have high grades or high test scores in all their subjects in order to meet the rubrics that we've set out in certain schools. And what you all appear to be in agreement about, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that if we use ability grouping smartly, we can have more integrated classrooms, because we can have schools where kids who have very different levels in different areas have come together and can be in the same classroom in a civics class, in a social studies class, sometimes in a humanities class, but where we can use ability grouping for subjects like math and other subjects as well, subjects like math, where it's really important to have sequential instruction so that you learn one subject very fully before you move on to the next one. And that if we employed ability grouping more for some subjects, we could have more integrated schools and ultimately more integrated classrooms if we allowed ourselves to group children in some subject areas by ability and other subject areas by perhaps merely grade. Is that something that you see as feasible?
Yeah, let me take a first stab at this, and I'm going to answer it at like the 30,000-foot level, and I think Maggie and Joseph then will be much more practical in their answers. But when it comes to equity within advanced programs, defined very broadly, if you restrict seats or have too few seats, you will always have equity problems. So the slide that the two of you showed earlier that showed how, I mean, even students who qualify, it's so few of them actually get seats because the city just hasn't provided enough seats for the qualified students. You will always, always, always have an equity problem. We see this all over the country. If you expand seats, it's amazing how fast your equity problem starts to go away. It doesn't wipe the problem out, but it's amazing how the numbers start to equalize a little bit. Then if you add things in like what Maggie was talking about earlier, which I would call universal screening. I would not do it with 4-year-olds for all the reasons that Maggie mentioned. I do it a little bit later, but everybody takes the screen. No one can opt out. Everyone just takes it. We know that that increases the number of low-income students identified by something like 3, 4, or 5 times in some studies. That's not magic. That's just being smart and providing opportunity to the children that you find. There are other things that you have to do to really get to the equity goals that I think we all have. But just doing those things, expanding services to meet the need you've already identified, and then universal screening. It doesn't take care of the entire problem, but people will be shocked at how much of the problem it actually solves, which is why the commission's recommendation to get rid of gifted and talented programs, that's what got New York City into this mess in the first place, right? As the senator talked about at the very beginning, when she went to a highly selective high school, was it Bronx Science, I think she said she went to, right? It was, all of the selective high schools were considered some of the most ethically and racially diverse in the entire country. Now they're not. Why is that? Well, because you started getting rid of all these programs, you restricted the number of seats to a ridiculously small number for the country's biggest school district. And then you sit back 20 years later and go, how on earth did this equity problem happen? Like it literally was a human-made problem, and which means it can be solved. Ability grouping is part of that. I think every school should have ability grouping in every school district in this country, let alone New York City. There should be advanced programs in every single school. I mean, I could go on to this for hours. I won't, but Joseph's sports example is a great one. Can you imagine going in and saying to the high school basketball, football, soccer coach, you know what? You guys are doing great, but we've decided that some schools in New York City really don't need varsity basketball. So we're going to target schools, and primarily the low income schools, and we're just going to take away some of the best coaches. Anyone who goes out for the team is going to make it, and things are going to be great. What's going to happen? It's exactly what happened to your selective high schools is exactly what's going to happen to sports. And you know what? People would never tolerate that for 2 games in basketball, but we actually do it in schools all the time to talented kids. It just doesn't make sense. So again, that's a very 30,000 foot look at it. I'll turn it over to my colleagues.
I want to just say, I know somebody, I used to do the content training for the state test, and I used to go up to Harlem, and I got to know a teacher up there, and he was teaching the 8th grade. And when they started the quote Algebra for All program, I asked him how it was going for him. Well, in order for him to do Algebra for All, he had to teach the algebra after school. That's not fair. That's an academic subject that should be taught during the day. And I said, I don't understand. He said, well, I don't have enough students that want to take the class. So there are like 7 of them that come after school to do this. I talked to another teacher who used to do it at lunchtime. That's not fair. Those children have a right to that education. And that's absolutely the antithesis of what we're supposed to be doing. And it's so terribly unfair to require them to spend extra time on their own to get the appropriate education for themselves. And it's just the way it is. And there weren't enough kids to fill the class during the day. So he did it after school, which isn't fair. Another thing that they did that it was a personal, I really did take this personally. They developed the Manhattan Youth Program, which does the after-school programs. And I'm all for after-school programs, don't get me wrong. However, they decided to put the academic programs under the auspices of the Manhattan Youth Program. And in order to do that, I used to be the math counts team coach, and I was supposed to apply to my own job. I was supposed to go and get fingerprinted and get transcripts and apply for my own job. First of all, I felt personally insulted by it, because the team did pretty well when I coached them. And I'm going to apply for my own job? No, I don't think so. That should be part of the school's program, and it should be encouraged that the school itself would have academic programs after school that the kids can be involved in. It shouldn't be a separate program under Manhattan Youth. That's daycare. That's not academics. That was the difference to me.
That's very interesting. I hadn't thought about that because I certainly have kids who are in the age where they're getting after school programs, and I've seen those offered. It's interesting to hear that from a teacher perspective.
But that's my teacher perspective.
Yes. So I want to ask now, we're talking about the way these conversations impact the conversation in New York City right now, which has been so volatile about admissions. So in place of current admissions practice, some advocates are now suggesting that we use something called an educational option model, sometimes referred to as the ed-opt model. This was first introduced in New York City in the 1970s, where schools would where they would admit students whose test scores fall across all portions of a bell curve in representative numbers, and meaning in New York City, what that looks like is 16% of students admitted would be students who perform below average on state standardized tests. 68% are students who receive average scores, and 16% of students would score above average on state tests. If we were to, now that was introduced in New York, hasn't been very successful because we wind up with schools where the higher achieving students don't want to go. It is being mentioned again and again right now, and we members of place have heard it again and again when we talk to city council members, state senators, state assembly people, when we say, what are you going to do if you take away these screen schools? We have heard in alarming numbers that they are considering the ed-opt model. And what I want to ask all of you is, what impact do you think, if we return to an ed-opt model, what impact would that have on the achievement of high ability students in New York City right now? Maggie, you want to start?
Oh,
go ahead. Joseph, you want to jump in?
okay. So we have in Francis High School, we have one ed-opt program and 3 other screening programs. All the disciplinary problems mostly came from the 16% below, right? If you're 16% below, what are you going to do in Stuyvesant? You won't be able to function, right? So ed-opt is another poor excuse, a poor way they try to. I don't know why they want to ruin the only good schools left. Because if they ruin Stuyvesant, Bronx, Brooklyn Tech, more parents will move out to the island or wherever the schools are better. Can you hear me?
Basic assumption. Oh, I'm sorry, Joseph. I thought you were finished.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we heard. I can hear you, Joseph.
Okay, I'm breaking up. I don't know why. So anyway, the add up is not a way to go, because you don't. All right. So you cannot. Okay, so let's talk about math, right? When you get to 9th grade, it's 8 years of hard work or 8 years of neglect. By putting a student who's not prepared into a more advanced class, you're not doing that child a favor. That poor child will not be able to survive academically.
Parents who know better will take one look at it and go, that is not going to work for my kid. We're going to find another option. That's what normally happens when you get rid of advanced programs, or you de-emphasize them, or you reduce the number of seats. Parents who have the social capital to figure out other options and go out and find them for their child are absolutely going to do everything they can to do that. So who's left in these schools with really weak advanced programs? The students who aren't getting them now, right? It just makes the problem worse. It literally is a race to the bottom. And the fact, this is one of my big frustrations with New York City, is that we're watching it happen in real time. And the best example of what happens when you make these bad decisions are the decisions that have been made over the last quarter century in New York City and how they organize these programs. So like, New York City is its own best example of what happens when you start to make, and I'm not saying that people did it on purpose, but when you start to make anti-intellectual moves in schools, it just makes the problems worse that you think you're trying to solve. And I do think that, I don't know if this is a Back to the Future thing, that New York City needs to go back to saying, yes, it's okay to have advanced programs in every single school, and we should universally screen. And it's okay to have selective high schools. In fact, we probably have about 25% as many as we should have, given the size of this this school district. We should be having more of them. And then, you know, really reinvigorate elementary, middle school advanced learning programs so that these kids all have pathways into these schools. Getting rid of all that is what has led to the current situation.
I wish you three were in charge of New York City public schools, is what I'm starting to feel, as we have just a few minutes left of, if I could make that happen, I would. I want to, we had a few questions submitted by some parents on our place email, and I want to ask a few of them. I'm going to ask a question from Maria, and she starts off with a bang. She says, most schools in America don't know how to teach math. What can be done to change that? What curricula would you recommend that teachers can adopt to align math teaching more with European/Asian model? So that's from a parent asking about math teaching.
Obviously, obviously, if a child doesn't go to Francis High School.
Yes, I don't think she's talking about Francis Lewis High School, but I do wonder if you think more outside of, you two have, Maggie and Joseph, you have both pushed for and had to fight for a little bit the kind of math programs that you're teaching at your schools. In the schools where you have a young first or second year teacher teaching the math program, do you think that there's a different curricula that might be more successful given what teachers have to deal with in an average first year, you know, an average early teacher in a math class?
I think that in our school, we didn't use any curriculum, any specific book, textbook, okay? In the accelerated program, we used, I used a lot of the materials out of the Art of Problem Solving pre-algebra book. They have some, the Art of Problem Solving program is fabulous. And I'm familiar now through tutoring, I'm familiar with the Beast Academy for the elementary school. That is one of the best programs out there. It is terrific. It's a fabulous program. They have books A, B, C, D. They have a book of puzzles for grades 1 and 2 so far, and they're going to develop more. It's a terrific program. They have high expectations. It's involving. It's not just memorization of algorithms. They introduce integers, believe it or not, in 4th grade. Then they have operations with integers in 5th grade, and I was like applauding when I saw this. It's a terrific program, and that would be a program that I am familiar with, that I really like. I don't teach elementary school I tutor elementary school, but I don't teach elementary school classes anymore, so I don't know how it would work in a classroom. But the books are terrific, and I also do like the Art of Problem Solving Pre-Algebra and Algebra book. Those are both the books that I'm familiar with.
Okay, I'm going to try to fit in.
If I may,
Please, Joseph, go.
If I may paraphrase what Maggie said, textbooks don't teach,
Right.
technologies don't teach,
Yeah.
curriculums don't teach,
Right.
teachers teach.
Yes.
You have to get better teachers. And you have to have compassionate teachers who love to teach children. Most administrations are not going to go for that.
Well, you need activities. I mean, there's a T-shirt that floating around that says, math, the only place where somebody buys 60 watermelons and nobody questions why. Real world problems have to be real world problems. They can't be, just contrived, awful things. And it should be developed by the teachers themselves, though. I mean, in our school, we developed projects for children to do that were legitimately real world problems,
I'll give you another example. My principal says if there are too many kids failing the reading exam, nothing the teacher does in the classroom is anywhere close to effective, right? But if a teacher has 100% passing, it's not because the kids did the work by themselves. I had a team teaching teacher who fortunately both had a single period of geometry, and they taught 4 geometry team teaching classes together. Because they programmed the kids wrong, they didn't tell me. Many kids failed the readings. Fortunately, one had 94% passing in one of our single classes. The other one had like 86% passing. The principal said the 86% passing is because the kid did the work, but the high failure rate is the teacher's fault. I said, really? That's what you're dealing with. The system will not deal with failure.
Right. So I'm going to throw in, this is a very specific parent question. We have a parent asking about what the panelists think about the fact that in New York City this year, it appears that there's going to be a canceled G&T program. So that she says, I'm the mother of a 4-year-old child, and I worked hard with my child during the last 8 months, and spent as much as I could in this difficult economy to get her ready for a G&T test. When I hear about them canceling the test, it's devastating. No one can forecast what will happen next year. How can the DOE not offer this exam? I think, that's very specific to a particular parent, but to make it more broadly, if we don't offer the exam this year, I think what some parents fear, and I've heard this particularly from parents who already have a child in G&T and are thinking about hoping that their next child can start down that path, is that if we don't offer it this year, that the whole program will go away. Dr. Plucker, have you looked into whether or not you think that's likely in New York City?
You know what, we get this question from school districts all the time because, obviously extraordinary circumstances, right? And it's just, you can't do testing the way that you would normally do testing.
Mm-hmm.
And any hopes of that happening with the current exponential spike are just being crushed. So people are really struggling with it. We've talked to lots of people across the country. There's not great options. It's horrible. But everything in the year 2020 is proving to be, well, not everything is proving to be a dumpster fire. So there's not great advice out there among educators, at least. That said, I'd really be careful about making sure that this doesn't become a backdoor way to kill all advanced programs for elementary school students. That would be my concern. And then you're going to end up like San Francisco, where the numbers are nosediving because they did the same thing. So I realize that for families whose children would take it this year, this is a really bad situation. Man, I just don't see ways around it. Every school district is struggling with this, and no one seems to have a good idea. But my concern would be you've got to fight tooth and nail to make sure that they're not backdoor canceling all advanced programs and they're using this as their reason to do it. That would be my political fear. I'm very sorry, I do have to run. I have just been informed that we have a late night soccer practice and I am the chauffeur for soccer practice. So I really need to run. It was a lot of fun. Thank you. Joseph, Maggie, you guys are saints. It made my heart hurt when I heard that you had both just retired. I was like, no, they're the solution to the problem. But it was great being with everyone. And please let me know if I can help again in the future.
Dr. Plucker,
Thank you so much
for your words and for your answers. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
I'm going to, Joseph and Maggie, if it's okay with you, I'm going to squeeze in one more parent question. And this is specific to New York practices. I have a parent asking about looping when a teacher stays with a class for the following year. And the parent asks, I asked because my daughter had a second grade teacher who looped and taught the same class in third grade, and it worked out beautifully as she already knew most of the students and did not have to spend 3 weeks assessing them in ELA and math. Do you think looping should be used more?
Yes, as long as the teacher is a good teacher. I actually looped in 7th and 8th grade. I had the kids 7th and 8th grade every year, and by the time when they got into 8th grade, then it worked out very well for me, and I liked that, and you know the kids liked it. But there was a teacher who I wouldn't want my child in that class for 2 years, and she had the kids for 2 years, and that was a very negative experience for them. So it depends on the teacher. I like the concept of looping, but it's a crapshoot. If you don't get the good teacher, it's a problem. I also think, though, that math specialists should be mandatory in the New York City public schools, starting in 4th grade. I can't imagine that these teachers are teaching these and they're using scripts, and it's not good. They need math specialists in 4th and 5th grade. That's what they need.
I absolutely agree with her. Looping is an excellent idea, provided you have the right teacher. In my department, there'll be only one teacher that I wouldn't do that to the poor children. The rest I would. What happened was my most high school administrators wants to do what's easy instead of what's right. So when I suggested looping, they didn't like that. But I made sure that last year, 2019 to 20, they looped. So the double period algebra kids who've passed stayed with the same teacher. All 3 pairs of teacher told me they're going to have close to 100% passing, and I'm going to see many, many very high grades. One of the teacher came from middle school. He used to teach the advanced kids algebra, and then last year he had 95% passing with the team teaching algebra kids in our building. All his kids were 1s and 2s. I told him I was very impressed. I called him a saint. Right? I said, you don't realize these are the kids you wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole in middle school, but you're able to get 95% of them to pass the region. That's tremendous. All his kids, 170 of them, had the death sentence issued by the state department, because if you get 1 or 2, they predict you have trouble. All the kids who are 2s in my building pass the regions. In order for kids to pass the algebra regions, they need to know the right 15% of what's in the curriculum to pass, the right one. Right, so I think looping is an excellent idea, but you got to be careful who the teacher is. Most kids fail the class because they don't like the teacher. Kids do things for the teacher instead of themselves until about maybe sophomore year. By the time they're juniors, they realize they are doing it for themselves. So looping is an excellent idea, provided you have the right mix.
Well, I'm going to wrap up our questions for our panelists now. And just say, thank you so very much, Joseph and Maggie, for speaking with us, because I think this conversation is, to go back to what we said about the single story, this is the perspective that has been missing from the story that gets told again and again and again. And both of you bring such extraordinary credibility to this conversation as teachers who have been teaching and quite obviously doing it so beautifully and so passionately and so incredibly well for New York City school students for many years now. And I agree wholeheartedly with Jonathan Plucker that it makes me very sad that none of my children will ever have you as math teachers. So that is our loss, but you have both been the enormous gain for so many students who have gone through your classrooms. And I extend deep thanks both for all those years of teaching and for joining us here this evening.
Thank you very much. This was very enjoyable. I like this.
And Yiatin, I'm going to turn it back over. Sorry, Joseph?
I said, I'm sorry. I contributed more than half my life to Francis Lewis High School. I don't think the last principal appreciated it. He did say to me that he's never met an educator who fought so hard for the benefit of children. At least he didn't take it personally. Oh, the superintendent must be drinking champagnes that I'm retiring. Well, they finally can do what they want to do. Well,
to the extent that they may not have always appreciated you, that's just testimony to how hard you work for your students. And we parents, by the way, know that to be true. We know very well when teachers are fighting for their students. Teachers shouldn't have to fight to deliver the kind of the quality of instruction that both of you have, but we parents see it and we realize it. And part of what Place NYC is trying to do is to celebrate the kind of successes that both of you have fought for your students. And that's part of what our organization is trying to help parents do, which is to advocate around the kind of quality education that both of you have delivered to your students over the years. And Yiatin, I want to turn it back over to you to just mention again the website, the newsletter, and any signups that parents can do if they want to have more information.
Thank you. First off, Maud, thank you so much. You're a great co-host, co-moderator. You've done so much research yourself to be able to ask the questions in such an intelligent way. I know Dr. Plucker is now offline, but I'm so grateful that he was able to join us tonight. And I'm so thankful and so sad that both Joseph and Maggie are no longer in our school system. And I know that, frankly, that's part of the reason why they're able to join us tonight and speak so frankly and openly about our schools. And we're very fortunate as Place to be recognized as a parent organization that elected officials, as well as educators and nationally recognized researchers are openly happy to join us in discussing educational issues in New York City, and really a lot of things that are happening around the country. So once again, really thankful for that. In terms of how to stay in touch with us, most of you who have joined us signed up, so we do have your email address. I will follow it up with some post-event information, as well as ways in which to connect with us on a more routine basis. We do have a Facebook page. We have a WeChat group. We do newsletters now every 2 weeks or so. And, we do events like this that we hope will bring together families who want to learn more about public education and ways in which we can improve it for all families and all students. So again, thank you so much for joining us tonight for 2 full hours and talking about ability grouping and how it supports both acceleration, integration, and academic excellence. And to all the hardworking parents who had a long day of pure remote, enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll see you soon. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.